everybody, Gurmy's Coaster Yard here, and in today's episode of Germanator Studios, we are, you guessed it, continuing work on our log flume, and we'll also be adding in some flat rides to our western area, because I realized we were kind of lacking in that department. But to start, we are going through here, through the station of our log flume, and I deleted the little decorative roof pieces, and those will come back in just a moment, but I wanted to put the little roof, flat roof, ceiling pieces in, whatever you want to call them, from the western set, because the decorative roof pieces are transparent on the bottom, and you can see right out of them. That is certainly not realistic, because materials, at least wooden materials, do not work quite that way. So we wanted it to be somewhat realistic from all angles, and since people will be able to ride this, and when this part goes up for download one day, since real people will be able to ride this, I wanted to make that adjustment just to make sure that everything looks real. Not even realistic at this point, just real. So anyhow, one thing I'm doing along here, I wanted to use this little piece with the hook, with the idea that the transfer track might have a little spot for boats to be unloaded from the ride area. So I put the little piece in there with the hook, and because it's a too tall piece, I just adjusted the roof a little bit. And then I experimented with putting it in the back, but I decided where I had it was probably the best spot for it. And, yeah. Now, moving along, I'm just putting in some more decorative wall pieces along our building at the base of the lift hills, and putting in some stone walls, and I figured those could act as sort of breakwaters or something like that. I kind of just experimented with that and thought it looked nice along the edge of this little pond area, and you can see me sort of experimenting with it along here. And one of the annoying things about building alongside plants in RollerCoaster Tycoon 3 is that when you want to delete one thing, you delete like half of the plants before you can get to the thing you're trying to delete. So that happened quite a bit here, and as you'll see, and we'll just have to go back in a little bit and replace those plants. So I started by placing that wall along the bottom there, and then I had the idea that I wanted to put a fence along the top of it, but I quickly realized that, and I remember we made this mistake in our dinosaur themed area. The top surface of this wall is uneven, and so you can't really put fences on it. They look like they're floating, and unfortunately, again, trying to be realistic here, so that was not going to work out. So I decided to put these fences on the outside edge of the wall, and that was all fine and good, but then I think at some point here in a moment, I decided to get rid of the fences entirely, and that's, I believe, where all the plants started deleting themselves, as you can see. So I decided to go back to the stone wall piece because I thought it would look nicer along along the edge of the pond area. We'll call it the pond area, even though it's not quite that. But I just thought it would be a nicer border, so I decided to continue with that piece. And because it is a little bit lower and that ride area is technically restricted, I went along the outside edge of that wall with the safari fence piece, so that way we have a proper height fence to keep people out, as well as the more higher, I don't know how to say it, the stone fence, which is more visible and more stands out more for the aesthetic look of things. And I thought that turned out pretty nicely in the end. I was pretty satisfied with it. And then along here, along the first lift hill, there were some spots where the trees were intersecting with the track, and certainly with the clearance envelope of the ride, which I didn't like. So I just got rid of that tree, and I believe I will put that back in a little bit. The one thing I decided to do that you can see me doing here is to recolor the ride's track in certain areas. So I wanted to keep a blue color throughout most of it on the interior wall of the canal, just to make it look more watery. You know, you love that blue look. But on the outside, I decided for all of the parts where the trough or the canal was sort of out in the open, to have it gray on the outside to make it look like it was some sort of like log transportation thing. I just thought the aesthetic of that looked a little bit nicer. Um, but if you guys have suggestions, let me know in the comments below. And one quick note, I decided to try putting some wooden fences along the edge of our big drop there coming out of the mountain. And that idea was sort of just to establish more of a border right along there, and to sort of try and maybe mask the parts of the mountain that are behind that trough. That was just sort of an idea I had that I tried out. I don't know if I'll keep that, but I don't think it looks bad. So we're going to roll with it for now. Anyway, um, onto one of our favorite subjects of sight lines. Coming off of that first lift hill, you can see, well, you can see out forward and past the mountain. So I decided to bring up the edge of the rock wall along where you can see me working on that now, just to make sure that sight line is preserved, and we end up sort of creating a whole little, I don't know what to call it, like a crevice in the ground, um, right through here that the drop sort of dives into, and then that will go through a cave entrance and into the indoor section of our ride. I will say now we don't entirely build the indoor section. We put the scenery down, um, however, and I do put a ceiling in place just to get an idea of how high it needs to be. But beyond that, we don't complete that section in this video. Hopefully, we'll get to that one in the next video. Anyhow, so you can see me doing more of my terrain work along here. It's pretty much the same as other terrain work I've done. You just kind of have to delete some stuff to adjust the terrain and to make it go for the tones that you want. And yeah, it's a pretty straightforward process, and I think by this point I shouldn't have to explain myself. But if you guys have any questions, definitely ask them in the comments below, and I will be happy to try and answer them. Anyhow, you'll notice that along here, along this section of the building, or of the mountain, especially on the back side of that little crevice, um, I don't bring up the terrain on the other side. I just leave it as a flat wall. And the reason for that, as you'll find out hopefully in the next episode, is on the opposite side of that, I want to place a scenery wall, um, to emphasize that it's a show building, but also to emphasize that the terrain is there really to be seen from one angle and to mask what's behind it. That's the main goal of the terrain here. So the rest of the terrain is it's visible from a lot of the park. The part we're working on now really isn't, um, and the parts that stay flat will eventually be um, completely hidden from the peep's view. Um, but the parts all around the outside are visible, so you want to make sure that from every angle the terrain looks passable as real terrain. Um, so that's an important thing to consider. But along this back little edge here, that will eventually turn into a building. That'll only really be visible from behind the scenes or from outside of the park, which hopefully I'll remember to do my best to mask that with some trees and stuff. Um, but we're not really too concerned about what people outside of the park see. It's what you experience and see inside the park that we're concerned about. So you can see really, this is a great angle of the ride here. If you want to pause the video just to enjoy it. Anyway, but you can see how from this angle, especially from the angle of riders on the ride, you can't really see the you can't really how do I word it? Well, it's what I've been talking about. You you can't really see past that rock formation. There would be no way to know that there's a building back there. Ideally, of course, as we build things, we'll go through and make sure that that is the case. But you can. There's no way to tell that it's just a flat wall on the other side. In fact, one example of this in the industry is Expedition Everest at Disney's Animal Kingdom. If you've ever gone into Google Earth and enabled the 3D buildings, that's the best way to see it. But I think it may also be visible from Street View. But the backside of Expedition Everest is not a complete mountain. The part that's completely outside of guest view from inside the park, it basically looks like a I don't want to call it a warehouse, but it's like a flat wall, and it looks like a building with sort of a mountain built around it. Um, but for reference, that point, if you're familiar with that ride, the part where it stops and the track looks broken ahead of you, and then you go backwards, it's sort of right underneath that part where that wall looking thing, well, that wall is, and where the illusion of the mountain really falls apart. But again, not something guests can see, and that's essentially the same idea as what I want to attempt here with our building that we're going to have, our show building. So more explanation of that. I decided to have this going with the Bandito Mountain theme. Again, Bandito Mountain is one of my NoLimits 2 projects that I submitted for the Roundup 450 competition, and using that theme here in this attraction, which I do want to pursue, I decided that this could be the Chinchilla Caverns section of the ride. So after that drop and going into the cave, you end up in the caverns. So I wanted to have lots of rocks, and you can see me here using the rock entrances to sort of create more up-close rock work. And the idea here, unfortunately, lighting is not fantastic in RollerCoaster Tycoon 3, but the idea with this being an enclosed space is that eventually the lighting will be really dark, and they won't be able to see very far, like more than 10 feet past them, the guests, or the riders, I should say. So my idea with that is that because it's so dark, they'll really only be able to see that up close rock work. And so I'm not too worried about what's beyond that. But I'm not sure how I'll approach doing the walls yet on the interior. I'm probably just going to do black colored slate walls. But if I can, I might use some stone walls from the Adventure wall set, just to emphasize that it's sort of a cave and it's a stony area, but that remains to be seen. I've not even filmed any of that yet, so I am not too concerned about it at the moment. I just want to get this video published, because I work at 8:30 tomorrow, and the video has to be live at 10. Anyway, so moving on, I want to have sort of a hybrid show area. So after that cavernous area, I think I want to do another fake rock wall and have the ride come out of that and go into our little western town section. And you will see me build that here in a moment too, using some of the various western wall pieces. But my reason for doing that is because where that western section ends up, the western town, is I mean, it's very visible from the pathways from within the park, and I wanted to avoid having the building being visible in any capacity from the park. And the only other way to do that, if we were to build a building around the western section, and I guess I shouldn't get too ahead of myself since I haven't built it yet, but hopefully it'll make sense soon. If I built a building around that, the best way to obstruct it from guest view would to build some other themed wall, or some large buildings that just sort of dwarf the mountain and dwarf the track around it. And it's this area where I'm laying this wooden platform now, which will change eventually, as you'll see. But this is where I build that town, and you can see it's in front of and to the left of the mountain and of the facade, and it just, I mean, really, if you were going to put a building there, it would not look good. So I decided, in the next episode is where you'll see me do this again. To reiterate, I'm going to build another rock wall on the other side of this, perpendicular to the mountain, and that will allow me to hide the building from all of the angles within the park, and this will become much clearer in the next episode too. So I won't try to explain it too much here, but that'll just allow me to hide that building even better and have something that feels feasible from the guest perspective, from the non-rider's perspective. And I hope I made myself clear there. Um, but again, I will address all of that in the next episode after I actually film it. It'll make a lot more sense. So hopefully my rambling has not confused you too much. But anyway, along here, we're just making a straightforward Western town. Finally able to use some of those um, Western set pieces with more detail. And I mentioned this in a previous episode. Being able to use these, like these work great for a show building or a ride as ride scenery, because they're higher detail and they're smaller, which means they can fit in that tighter show building space. And when you're on a ride, I think the perception of depth sort of changes. And despite those buildings being smaller, um, in the context of the entire set and the speed at which the ride moves, I think those pieces, the smaller size of those pieces, will not be too apparent, if that makes sense. Um, Anyhow, here you can see me replacing the ground with some brown slate pieces. We use these in our dinosaur dark ride as well. Um, these same pieces, not necessarily the same color, but I'm basically using them for the same purpose of creating a fake ground. And this also establishes a good foundation for our set piece. However, this I may see about changing this in the next episode. I don't think I will, just because of issues with raising the height of terrain underneath already placed scenery. I think that'll cause some issues. So I may leave it like this, but you'll see in the next episode how we approach this section of the build. Um, and of course, this is also a hybrid of using the western wall pieces along with the western scenery pieces. You can see there to make a sort of cap for that weird edge. You can rewind to see what I mean by weird edge if you need to. I just used the western wall pieces to create a fake little building. And all around, I think this was a nice set piece, and I think it worked really nicely. Um, Anyhow, now I think I'm just experimenting with some more pieces along here. And you can see me going through with the office roof pieces, sort of trying to establish a border. And what I was doing there, and you can see I already deleted them, so I guess I won't get too into detail. But I was basically trying to establish a border for when under the assumption that we were going to put a building there. This was before I decided that a building wouldn't be feasible. Um, and if I hadn't decided yet, I have now, because now that I've told you I'm going to do it one way, I think I'm obligated to. So, what's coming up next? Ah, yes. Well, I gotta wait for this clip to end. I don't, oh no, nervous laughter, haha. If any of you are watching still, hello. Okay, the scene is changing. So now, I think this is the last scene of the episode, and I'll try to include a POV of the updated log ride too. But I wanted to put some more attractions in here. So I noticed this little square here was the perfect size for our the Western show piece. I don't know what you would call it, attraction. So I decided to put that in there. The only real downside here, um, and I realized with a few simple changes, I may be able to update that. I'm not sure, but and it looks like it didn't even place it right away. So basically, when I placed that little Western show, um, the queue line and exit all sort of get crunched together in one area, and it just does not look great. So I may look into some better solutions for that in a little bit. But in the meantime, we started with the little Rotovator ride in that spot, but I didn't like how tall it was next to that little cooler area for the restaurant, and I didn't want guests to really be able to see down into there. So I placed that with the Buffalo Roundabout. And once we finish the log rides, Western Town, I'll know what my space parameters are um, back in that little area between that and the roller coaster. And I think I'll place some more rides back in there because we have a lot of Western themed flat rides in the game. In fact, I think there are probably more Western themed flat rides than any other theme. So I definitely want to take advantage of that and use as many of those as we feasibly can. But anyway, yes, you can see now, moving back to our little Western show, and you can see what I mean. There was really only one tile to work with to connect the entrance and exit to the main path. So that gave me some struggles. It was definitely a headache. And the terrain along here was also being very much a headache. But you can see in the end we got it all resolved. And here in a moment I will put a little building around here. This will sort of look like a dock house from the colonial side. Um, but from the western side of things, it will be sort of a queue building just for this show. And that way the theme of the queue, not that it has a very overt theme, but because it's for a Western attraction, I don't really want it to be visible from the colonial um, section of the park, especially because it's right next to it. So I just put that little building there to sort of mask the two areas together and make it a little more covert, if that makes sense. So what else? Oh yes, I'm just putting a little garage door in there, just so that way from the docks it looks like it could be a little boathouse or something like that. And then adjusting some of this pathway and terrain, and nothing too crazy. Anyhow, what next? What next? Because I filmed this a few days ago, so I cannot remember what all I built. That's the great struggle of doing this for fun and not to be serious. Anyhow, yeah, right along here, I was just looking to see if there were some spots that I could put that Rotavator ride. That one's really fun, and it's one that I like to have in my parks when I can. But I didn't find a spot for it in this episode. And yes, I also decided to put in the Western Ferris wheel right along the waterfront. I thought that was probably the best section for it, and that one was pretty easy to place. And you'll notice I bring the queue out a few blocks before connecting it to the path, and I just do that so that way we can put some landscaping on either side of that entrance. But we are finally coming up on the end of this footage. I'm going to roll a POV here shortly, but in the meantime, have a great rest of your day, and I will see you in the next episode. Goodbye.